Bruins Beat is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And we're here with Patrick Donnelly. Pat, what is up?
What's going on? Excited to make my debut.
Yeah, this is your Bruins Beat debut. It's great to have someone new on, get a new voice. Better than Connor, obviously. Everyone knows that. I mean, come on.
What's he doing out in Arizona? All the good stuff's up in New Hampshire.
Oh my God, I know. I already have. I know you're in New Hampshire. We were all away this weekend. He's in Arizona. Yep. You're a huge New Hampshire guy. We were talking at development camp. I think we were saying like our favorite New England spots. I think I said Maine, and you said I'm New Hampshire all the way because your family has a connection there. So and you take great pictures too.
North Conway area my whole life. So if I could just like golf and ski up there the rest of my life, that'd be the dream. But
the pictures you
pay the bill somehow. I
know that's the one thing. Someone's gonna be around Boston right about the Bruins. The good thing is that you take a lot of great photos, and you have a photo Instagram account. I feel like you do.
I do. It's so everything else I do on Twitter is at PatDon12, and my photos is at PatDonPhotos. So take out the 12 and just do the photos. You'll find everything there, like hockey photography, sports, landscapes, everything. So yeah.
You are a hell of a photographer, and you make me want to go to New Hampshire, which I already do. It's a really nice place. Yeah. I was in Chicago this weekend. It was fun. I don't have a voice. I lost it. Yeah, Chicago's a teeny bit different than New Hampshire. I'd never been. It was huge. I was getting recommendations from people on Instagram and stuff. There were, had deep dish pizza, had Portillo's. It was a fun time. Every building is huge. The city is massive. I didn't realize how big Chicago was. Went to the Red Sox Cubs. That was really fun. Red Sox won the night we went. We were in the bleachers kind of taunting other Cubs fans, but they were nice. They were very nice. So it was good. And then we went to a country music festival on Thursday. So that was fun. A lot of barbecue was there. So it was a good time. But speaking of Connor, by the way, I have this. He posted this, so I guess I have this forever for memes. This photo right here of him being stuck in like a crack in the ground. I'm going to be using that a lot this upcoming season. So glad we have that.
Free material.
Yes. Oh my God. We're getting stuff ready. All of us, we have to get stuff ready for the season. So that'll be a good little meme I can throw out there when the Bruins are like, stuck in a salary cap crunch or something. Right. I can't be giving away my ammunition this quickly. But anyways, why don't we discuss some bigger picture Bruin stuff? This is since it's your first time on. Hopefully these listeners are BSJ subscribers. If they're not, go subscribe, obviously. Because you've been doing a great job since you took over in, when was that? Was that April?
Fully in April. I'd been kind of tag teaming for a couple months before then, but made the full switch right in time for the playoff collapse.
Yeah, you picked a great time. You're probably like, oh, I have a couple months ahead of me of playoff hockey, and it was like 3 weeks. But the big thing, obviously, free agency's done. We'll get to sort of your thoughts on that in a second. We're kind of going in the dog days, but the Bruins aren't fully dog days because you have the futures of Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci kind of hanging in the balance. And I think I saw on Twitter on Monday, there was a photo floating around a Brad Marchand photo shoot, and it was from the side, and everyone's like, is that a C or is that an A? And then it showed him in the locker room and it was an A. And I think even if Bergeron was leaving, they're not just going to be like, oh, here's the C for this photo shoot, Brad. I think it's a little more to it than that. But if you had to guess right now, I know you and I talked about this at development camp, watching the prospects, but I mean, where do you think the Bruins stand right now on Krejci and Bergeron?
Yeah, I mean, quickly on Marchand, I mean, even if Bergeron was leaving, I don't think the Bruins would allow a potential captaincy leak to happen like that.
Yeah, no, they're pretty tight.
Warrior Ice Arena is already a very public place. Anyone can walk in there. So I don't know. I think it's status quo right now. But with Bergeron and Krejci, if you talked to me right after Game 7, I would have said they're both done. Especially with the way, Bergeron hugged the guys last year after Carolina too, or I guess 2 years ago now. And he does that. It's all emotional. He does the final salute, and everyone's like, "Oh man, that's it." And Krejci, we kind of always felt like last season was the last hurrah. And so if you talk to me again right after Game 7, I would have said they're both done. But I think the way Bergeron talked at breakup day, and I think it was Fluto asked him, if you guys had won the cup, would you have retired? And he didn't have an answer. He legitimately did not know. So that kind of made us all go, oh, maybe he's not done. So if I had to handicap it right now, I'd lean towards Bergeron comes back one more time. I think, maybe say what you want about this. I think, captaining the centennial season is important to a guy like him. Maybe he sees the writing on the wall with the center situation and doesn't want to leave them up the creek. But Krejci, I do think he's sort of done. He talked about last year how it was harder for him. His family was away. I think they live in South Carolina. That's where they spend their off seasons. Still, even if they were in Czech or South Carolina, it's not easy being away from your family. And especially, no one ever was going to accuse David Krejci of being fast, but he did look, especially when he was back and playing hurt during the playoffs, he did look a little bit behind the play. So I think they'd be happy with either coming back, but I would say one of the two, probably Bergeron.
Yeah, I'm with you on this. It's funny because you mentioned after Game 7, we all in the press room were kind of like, they're done. This is no way. This was the last dance anyway, and they're not going to come back. But the dust settles, the smoke clears, and you mentioned the Bergeron breakup day comments. You mentioned the 100-year thing. I think that's true. I don't know if he would come back solely. Connor's mentioned this, him coming back so that the Bruins aren't kind of screwed at center. Yeah. I don't know if that was the only thing. I don't think that's like the reason he comes back. Like, I don't think he's like, I wanted to save the Bruins, but I do think it's a thing. And I will, I'm not the only one saying this. The Bruins need him back bad. I mean, really bad. And you look at their cap situation, you look at their center situation without Bergeron and Krejci. And, Coyle and Zacha, I think, could hold their own, but I don't think you're even close to, obviously, the production that you would get with even just Bergeron as your number one center. I think they would be okay. I think they would compete for a wild card spot. I think they would be, down the stretch you'd have real hockey games down the stretch of the regular season if Coyle and Zacha wanted to. By the way, I think you still probably do this year, even with Bergeron, if he comes back. But you need him back. You need him back bad. And, I just think that it's funny because I remember last year with the potential of Bergeron retiring, we were all saying he's got so many miles on him, right? He's been playing for so long. The injury history is extensive. Get out while you're still relatively healthy. And you look at even this season, right? Like, this team does not look like last year's team. And even though last year around this time, we were all saying, like, are they going to even contend? They still had the potential to be really good. It was just those injuries at the beginning. You still had Taylor Hall. You were wondering about a full season of Hampus Lindholm. And it was kind of like, if it's best case scenario, they're going to be really good if Ullmark takes that next step. And they did. That all happened. But now that you've seen the best case scenarios, this season's team is going to be worse, obviously. But I don't think it's going to be like, they'll still be in first place or second place. I think it's going to be, you're going to fight for a playoff spot, and that's fine. Now, does Bergeron want to come back to that? Does he want to come back to a team that can just squeak in? They've always, the thing with that core of Bergeron, Marchand, Krejci, they've always believed if they can just get into the playoffs, they feel like they have a chance, no matter what. Even if it's 2017 and you've got, Joe Morrow as your number 2 left shot defenseman, like, they've always felt
Tommy Cross, which
was a great one. That was the famous Charlie McAvoy playoff run. But they always felt like they had a chance. So maybe, just saying, hey, we can get in. We have the veterans, guys like Van Riemsdyk and Lucic, and veterans who can kind of will this locker room through the season. Maybe that's enough for him to be like, I'm coming back. I still think he's definitely good enough to be a number 1 center. That's not like, the issue is not like starting to decline. It's like Derek Jeter at the end of his career, where it's like, all right, dude, like, let's call this one quits.
Limping to 3,000 hits.
Yeah.
Whatever it was.
His 3,000 hit was like August, and they're like, it's his second or third home run of the season. Krejci's a different story. I think, Krejci had those comments recently to a Czech reporter. Make me think he's probably done. I'm not interested in him saying, I'm going to come back in January, because I think we saw that with Rask. I know it's a goalie situation. I know it's an injury thing, but to come in mid-season and ramp up, and to come into a dressing room that is fully in on a season, I don't love the idea of that with things created and lines starting to form and Zaka settling into that number 2 center spot, I don't have a huge desire for Krejci to come back in like January and be like, I'm back, guys. I'm ready for the stretch run. Like, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, especially if things are working well and he takes someone's place or whatnot. It's the last thing too. Exactly like you said. Like, I just don't see someone who at his age with his mileage, and again, like we've said, is never going to be accused of being fast, even though he was always able to keep up during his career. I don't know. And there's a lot of mileage. He had the hip issues in the past. Like, if he's coming in, he has to ramp up. And I mean, we talk about the culture in the Bruins room. I don't think anyone would be like throwing a hissy fit if he did come back and take a spot. But we probably rub some guys the wrong way. And so I don't see it. Plus, like, it never. How often do you see that working? And especially with his age, how fast the league is, I just don't see it. It's, even if like Bergeron were to do that too. Like, obviously it's Patrice Bergeron, you'd make room for him, but I don't see the midseason ramp up. And like his comments where he was talking about maybe the Czech league, and where he told us Bruins are bust. It's I don't see it. I could see him do the Czech league and play in the World Championships, where that's in Prague next year, and that playing at home has obviously been super important to him in the past. But I don't know about a midseason edition.
Yeah, I don't love that idea. And by the way, I wouldn't like it for Bergeron either. Coming back mid-season, right. Like, you're just going to give him the C again. I don't like that. Play the full season or retire. I mean, that's how I look at it. And
like people talk about, I don't know who first said it, but people talk about, once that thought kind of creeps into your mind, is you're done. Like the second you could say it right now about them too. Like, the second you think about, oh, maybe I am done, or maybe I want to retire, like you're kind of halfway there already. So
yeah, and you see it. I mean, you have to be so in on these seasons. You saw, I think it was on Behind the Bee when they did Chara's retirement ceremony at Legends last year. There was a conversation Chara had with, I think it was like Marchand and Bergeron after, and they were asking him about it, and he was like, I just, I felt it, and I just couldn't do it again. And I think once that kind of creeps in, once that thought starts to creep in, it's like, all right, it's like when you're about to go out at night and you see your own bed and you're like, ooh, that looks really comfortable. I might have to sit down, lay down for a second. Then it's like, there's no way I'm going out. It's similar to that. You have to be all in on playing and playing a full season. And I think once that thought creeps in, you're sort of close to done.
And especially with someone like Bergeron too, where what he's put his body through, even last year, he was healthy throughout the year. And then regular season finale, herniated disc, freak thing. And, Sweeney said last week or 2 weeks ago that he's no health issues, but man, you gotta weigh wanting to put your body through 82 games again. And even like last year, we realized, the importance of load management, especially when you build up such a big lead in the standings. They're not going to have that luxury this year. So how do you work in load management for Bergeron, especially if he's suffering through the grind of an 82 game season?
Yeah, I don't know how you do it. Before we continue on with the conversation, I want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to get the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/Boston to get up to $200 in bonus bets. Again, that's FanDuel.com/Boston. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. The other thing I'll hit on is this, and I've mentioned it briefly in the past, and at some point, obviously Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci's contributions to this organization have been incredible. I mean, they'll both be numbers retired. Bergeron's a definite Hall of Famer. Krejci, you can argue about it. Consummate pros, all those things. I am very interested in what the direction of this franchise is post Bergeron and Krejci. And I would like to see them sort of address it at some point. Now, this isn't the offseason to do it. This is not, because the salary cap didn't really go up much. You don't have much space in general. Neither does anybody else. The trade market stinks. Like, this is not really the offseason that you go out and do that and pursue, a guy you feel is a number one center or a replacement. But I would like to see this franchise move on. I would like to see this franchise move to that next generation, because this core, as good as they've been, have been around a really long time.
Yep.
Really long. I mean, this is like 2007, 2006, actually, I think. This core has been around, and they've been consistently good in the regular season. They've won a cup. They've went to two others. I think we all agree they should have another cup win on their resume. Mm-hmm. Whether that happens or not, I mean, it's becoming increasingly likely that probably isn't going to happen. I would like to see this franchise move on. I would like to see this franchise at some point say, you know what, it's time to get some new blood down the middle. And again, this isn't the offseason to do it. And I love Patrice Bergeron. It's nothing against Bergeron. It's just this franchise needs to move past the just propping open the window. And even last year, like, it's hard to say, because last year they were a wagon. Like, that was a team that was favored by everyone, obviously, to win the cup. Best regular season team ever. They had all the pieces. They had all the depth. It wasn't an issue last year. But now that you kind of have the fallout from it of you don't really have first round picks for the next 2 years, your prospect pool is razor thin with anything really talented. I would like to see this organization move on at some point. And I think they need it, because I think they need to be forced to address down the middle. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, people in our age group, watching Bergeron, Lucic, Marchand, Chara make their way as Bruins, and we're toddlers. And now here we are, graduated college.
We weren't toddlers. We were not toddlers.
I'm thinking like the 2003 draft when Bergeron.
Oh yes, yes.
But when that starts coming into fruition, 2007, I'm in first grade.
You know what's funny? That you're the first podcast guest I think that's ever been younger than me on this. So congratulations. It's a first for people. I'm the older one on this. That's rare.
Yeah, no, I definitely see what you're saying. But the whole thing is like you said, this isn't the offseason to do it. And if you do go into next season with Zacha and Coyle, also sorry if you can hear that. They're my neighbors next door having work done.
I can't hear it, but I know what you mean, because that always happens around here.
Great. So, I mean, Zacha and Coyle, man, in a perfect world, Pavel Zacha is your two. I don't know if he can be a number one center. Charlie Coyle, to this point, has never proven he can consistently stick as a top six center. He showed it in a small burst in the playoffs last year. He looked pretty good with Marchand and DeBrusk. Good two-way reliability. He's a menace below the dots. Like, he'll do what you need, but I don't know, especially like when you look at what you need for offensive production out of a top tier center. I don't know if he can bring that. Pavel Zacha, again, will probably get you 20 goals, 50 points. Again, 2 and 3, perfect world. Maybe a low end 2 for Charlie Coyle. And then you look in the prospect pool, and Matthew Poitras is kind of the hope and savior right now, if he can pan out in a couple of years. But he's not close either.
No, not close.
He's got another year in the OHL. He's going to need at least a year in the AHL, because he's a smaller frame. He's got to really get used to the pro ranks once he eventually makes that leap, because this year he can either only play in Boston or the CHL just because of that agreement. So the help isn't close. And, whether it's like Brett Harrison, he's starting as a wing. Maybe he makes his way as a wing as a full-time pro. Maybe even Georgi Merkulov too. Kind of the same boat. Is he a center? Is he a wing? Like, the upside is there, but what's his floor? And so now you look at, there's no guaranteed help coming unless, Johnny Beecher somehow skyrockets, which probably isn't going to happen. He's going to have a great career as a bottom six center, high floor guy. But you look at next offseason, where the free agent pool, if these guys make it there, you have like an Elias Lindholm type there, where maybe this offseason, if you didn't have the cap troubles you knew for sure Bergeron wasn't coming back, and you actually had some assets and you felt you could lock him up, that'd be a perfect trade candidate. But I think next season, kind of like you said, this offseason, it's just not in the cards. And if you go into next season with Zacha and Coyle, your defense is good enough. Your goaltending is obviously elite. Your wings should be good enough too, where you'll be in a playoff mix. You're obviously not going to be breaking any records. It's kind of the same with and without Bergeron too. Like the forward group looks much better with a Patrice Bergeron there. But either way, the floor or the ceiling is for this team is you're in the playoff hunt, and maybe it's the good kind of just get in like we saw with Florida last year, or it's the not so good kind of just get in like Pittsburgh would have been last year, where they probably would have just been cannon fodder for their first round opponent. But next offseason, when you got tons of cap space, you probably have a better idea of what's going on with Patrice Bergeron, either if he plays this season or if he just calls it this summer. Next offseason is definitely the time to make a move. And we've had this conversation before too, like you said, propping open the window, like 2019, after that 2020, even going into the 2019 season when they made the run to the finals, it was years of how much longer can they keep this going? Char is not getting any older. Bergeron's creeping way into the wrong side of 30. Marchand. So I don't know. It's crazy to think that after last season and the records they broke and how we all thought, slam dunk, this is it, that we're right back to where we were for the last like 4 years.
Well, because you're 100%. It is wild because, I mean, you look at last year's team, right? And I think what scares everyone is Linus Ullmark is not going to match what he did last year. He just isn't. Yep. He can still be a top 10 goalie, but he's not going to do what he did last year, right? Hampus Lindholm was a Norris candidate. Like, probably not happening again. Maybe it does, right? And that'd be great if it did. You're not adding Dmitry Orlov, Tyler Bertuzzi, and Garnet Hathaway at the deadline again. You don't have the pieces for it. And it just, you had, those were the guys, right? And those were big producers. You had Taylor Hall on the third line. If you think back to last year, right? Like Pastrnak had 60 goals. We expect something around that at least. I mean, I don't think he hit 60 next. Maybe he doesn't hit 60 next year, but he's going to be hitting around 40, 50 goals. But like, people forget that Marchand was almost underperforming last year at times. And the hip surgery showed, and he slowed down a bit, but he did all that in spite of it. You had guys like Tyler Bertuzzi, Taylor Hall on the third line, Pavel Zacha stepped up, Jake DeBrusk stepped up when he wasn't injured. Like, you had all these guys kind of pulling their weight, pulling more than their weight. And that was why. I mean, if that's not all there, they're obviously a very different hockey team. But it was your depth. It was those other pieces, those luxuries really, that sort of willed you to being the best team in regular season history. And, you're going into this year, maybe Morgan Geekie takes a big step forward, which would be great for this team. He's got the frame for it. People think he has the potential. That'd be great, if he does that. But you don't have your Bertuzzi, you don't have Taylor Hall, you don't have Dmitry Orlov. Are you getting those guys at the deadline? Are you mortgaging more of your future to just keep propping open this window? Probably not. And I don't think you should. You didn't have a first round pick this year. You don't have one next year. So like, what are you doing at the next
3 picks next year?
I know. So that's the other thing. You have to get those. You have to get
6 rounders.
You have to get picks back. That's the other, that's people don't really kind of grasp, is you can't keep doing this in drafts. Like if you look at it, this is kind of common sense, but if you look at teams that have fallen on hard times, right? Go back like 5-6 years, you look at their drafts, they either didn't hit on anybody or they didn't have picks. And right now the Bruins, credit to the front office, they continue to kind of find a way to keep this team competitive. I think it's a lot in part due to the Bergeron core just continuing to produce. I think they've also done okay at trading firsts for long-term players. I thought they kind of were going to do that with Bertuzzi. They didn't, but like Hampus Lindholm was a great example of like, you needed a big left shot defenseman who could be a potential number one. You traded a first for him, you got him. Like that was worth it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know. I just think that, at some point here, you got to transition and you have the future core. You don't need to like sell off McAvoy or Pastrnak or anything like that, but to continue to sell off pieces to contend, right? Like selling future pieces, I don't think is the right move, because I think you need to kind of keep an eye on the future.
Yeah. And I mean, barring bringing back Bergeron or Krejci, this kind of feels like it's the team. Like at the deadline, like we said, what can you do? What aside from maybe moving some of your mid-tier prospects, which they've done a decent enough job at picking up in the later rounds of the draft, like you can't really ship out any more draft picks. And for as weak of a prospect pool as you have, you kind of need those guys to hopefully pan out at some point. So like kind of feels it, like, especially with your cap space, say like they have like 5.4 million left per like cap friendly after this morning's signings of the 3 RFAs. And so you got that left to give out to Swayman and Frederick and possibly Bergeron. And obviously it can be maneuvered and you can go a little over in the off season. So I bet that somehow all fits, but when you get into the season and that's the cap space you have, this is the roster you have, how can you add to that aside from, sending money out in a true like hockey trade? So I don't know, like you're kind of banking on, like we said, Morgan Geekie hitting that upside that we all think he has with bigger opportunity. I mean, James Van Riemsdyk is kind of a prime case study for get him out of a horrible team and see if he can return to what he once was. Obviously, like the pace wasn't there. He's as a 34-year-old power forward last year, but it was the only year aside from his rookie year where he wasn't at least on a 20 goal pace over 82 games. So I would say he's a pretty good bet to bounce back unless, last year is what he is at this point. And you hope power play ticks back up, but I don't know. I don't know what else you can do here.
I don't either. I don't. And it goes back to, I think the Florida Panthers run to the Stanley Cup final this year is going to influence a lot of teams for the next couple of years. I think the Bruins are one of them.
Yep.
In that the Panthers have the core in place. There wasn't a ton of depth on paper. You look at like Mark Stahl, Radko Gudas. Are you really looking at those guys and going, oh, that's a core, that's some depth on D. Like, no, they're just guys. They're just guys. And I think because the Panthers went on that run to the cup and, just got hot at the right time, I think teams like the Bruins just look at it and say, you know what, if we can just sneak into the playoffs, we have the core that has gone there before. We have really solid goaltending, solid defense core, good enough offensively that hold our own. Like, I think that's how they look at it. And I think a lot of other teams are going to try to do that too. Pittsburgh, I wouldn't be surprised if, I know they're Aaron and Erik Karlsson, but it's a similar thing. Like the NHL playoffs, like the Athletic did a thing where they polled writers about who they think is going to be like, win the cup next year. And I think the Carolina was like 41%. I'm like, well, all right, that means they will not win the cup next year.
Yeah, because they've got to win a conference final game first.
Yes, you've got to get past the conference final first. But I go back to that in that I just, it's almost better not to be favored. And I think the Bruins realize that. That does not mean I think they're going to the cup, because I don't. But I think they have a real chance once they get in to the playoffs. But yeah, direction wise, they need to, and we've mentioned this, there has to be some eye to the future. And you have, your core is what? Pastrnak, McAvoy, Swayman, Lindholm, Omark. That's not a terrible, Zaka, Coyle. Like that's a fine base. If you could just add a legitimate number one center to that, I think people would feel a lot better. But again, I don't want Bergeron and Krejci gone. But at some point, this organization, they're years overdue of figuring out what's going on up top. I think they need to do it.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what we said, where next year's cap situation, next year's free agent class is much better than this year. Like you don't necessarily have to draft that center. Like if you make a smart free agent signing, or if you happen to land one of the big fish, potentially problem solved. But obviously, we never know.
Yeah, free agent draft, I wouldn't put in there now, just because I think they don't have a first next year as of right now. I don't know how they're getting one back.
Yeah, the only in-house solution is really Poitras if he hits.
Yes, and the only way I think they draft a center in like the first round would be if they stunk next year and they were like, you know what, we're going to sell off like Omark, we're going to sell off some pieces here. Then I think they would be in the first round. That's the thing. If they stunk next year, you do have some pieces that I think could be valuable to contenders that I think you could either get prospects for or draft picks for.
Yeah, and it's like kind of when you make that call on, all right, is Jake DeBrusk part of our core, he's a contract year. So if you do stink and you bottom out, maybe he's one of your more attractive trade pieces. I'm not saying you do it. Maybe you view him as part of the core, but there are options there. And that is the worst case scenario, bottoming out, which, there is a vocal portion of the fan base, whether it's a majority or minority, that's like, just rebuild already. Which they won't ever do, but
no. And I also think that they don't need to rebuild. I think you could, if they stunk, let's do this. Let's say the Bruins stunk next year, right? They're like a bottom 5 team or something. They just stink. I mean, they just are bad. You obviously you wouldn't trade your Pasternaks, your McAvoy. Pasternak, McAvoy, Swayman, maybe. Like, you keep those guys. But as for like Omar, DeBrusk, you want to discuss Marchand? You have guys there that could net you picks or prospects, or even if you want to do hockey trades. I don't know if you would do that in that situation. But you have a core there that you don't need to fully rebuild. It's just a bad year, but trade off pieces like that. By the way, I don't think that's going to happen. I genuinely don't, but it's an interesting discussion.
The good news is, too, the pick you sent to Detroit is top 10 protected next year. So if you do fall straight into the basement, you're getting that pick back, and it's like it never happened. Except when you give it up in 25. But but I mean, like, if that were to happen, worst case scenario, it's like we said, it's the same. It's crazy how things just keep coming full circle, because that would be the same exact position they were in 2015, 2016, where, it's maybe a couple, like 2-3 lean years, but with the core you have, you should be right back in short order.
Yeah, I think they're sort of headed for that. I don't, in the coming years, maybe not this year, but I think, like, you look at, it's hard to connect it to past years, but like a 2014-15 coming off the President's Trophy year, they had a good roster, just didn't, just missed the playoffs. I think this team's going to contend for the playoffs. I think they're going to be, in it. As I've said on past episodes, the Atlantic Division's sneaky not as good as it's usually been in past years. So I think you have to take that into account with this team. But anyways, Pat, this has been fun. It's been really fun. We got to do this more. Before you go, what would you like to plug? What can people look forward to over at Boston Sports Journal?
So working on right now, we got our top 20 prospect rankings coming out. Perfect timing. Expect Matthew Poitras to be pretty high there.
Yeah, I would expect that.
Yeah, but first one coming out later today will be 11 through 20, the bottom half of it. So that'll be coming the coming weeks, the prospect rankings. Obviously, as we await the news on Swayman, Frederick, Bergeron, Krejci, be on the lookout for that. But thank you for having me.
Of course, Patrick, we're going to do this more. And that's for this week's Bruins Beat. You Bruins Beat listeners have a great rest. Your week.